Aye. Okay, so you know what? I can't help. We're in this tekufa between after Pesach. My brain is going to Lag Baimer already. So let's just talk about Lag Baimer a little bit. You know, there's an old minig in Yerushalayim. You know that Lag Baimer. So there's a very, very old minig to go to Meron, the kever of Shem Bar Yochai, right? That's what Lag Baimer is. Simcha of Shem Bar Yochai's yard site and so on. But there's an old minig in Yerushalayim that those Yidden that in those days especially it was very hard to travel up north. So it's very hard to get to Meron. So there was a second option that if you're in Yerushalayim or the areas around Yerushalayim, instead of going to Shimon by Meron, you would go to Shimon HaTzadik in Yerushalayim. Even now we know where the kever of Shimon HaTzadik is. Who's Shimon HaTzadik? So Shimon HaTzadik was one of the great Kahanim Gedolim, in the second Beis HaMikdash. He was a Kohen Gadol for 40 years. He was known Shimon HaTzadik. The Gemara says amazing things about him. The Gemara says that during his reign, I guess you can say, while he was Kohen Gadol for those 40 years, so Shimon HaTzadik, every Yom Kippur, when they took the red string, right, and they would tie it on half of it on the horns of the Sar La'azazel, the goat that would be thrown down the mountain, right, and half of it would remain behind in the Beis HaMikdash. Every single year, and during the 40 years of Shimon HaTzadik's Kahuna Gedola, the red string that remained behind turned white, symbolizing that Klal Yisrael were atoned for all their theirs. 40 years. During his 40 years, the Ner Maravi in the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash never went out, as a symbol that the Shechina, the divine presence, is with Klal Yisrael. Shimon HaTzadik. There's also another famous story with Shimon HaTzadik that the Gemara says about Shimon HaTzadik, that he said that in his whole life he never allowed himself to eat of the carbon that was brought by a nazir that became tameh, right? We know the halacha is a person becomes a nazir, so they're not allowed to drink wine or cut their hair, become tameh to a dead body. And if the nazir becomes tameh, then he has to redo it again, and he brings certain karbanas. Shimon HaTzadik said that whenever he was involved in a nazir that became tameh and have to bring karbanas, he never really liked getting involved with it, because he was always concerned that the nazir now that he has to redo it, it's like he's regretting, the fact that he became a nazir, because now it's like double the amount of time. Except for one particular scenario. There was one episode of where a person became a nazir, and Shimon HaTzadik was confident that he was doing it l'shem shemayim for the right reasons, and even if he became tameh and he has to redo it again, he's still going to be 100% l'shem shemayim. So that's another interesting thing, a tidbit about Shimon HaTzadik, that he was so excited to be able to partake, to find a nazir that was l'shem shemayim. Okay, so who's Shimon HaTzadik? Like, what is he, and why was he sort of the runner-up prize? Instead of Shem Bar Yochai Meron, at least you go to Shimon HaTzadik in Yerushalayim. Like, what's it? Okay. Another thing to think about when it comes close to Lag Baimer is why is Lag Baimer so exciting? Because one of the reasons is we know that during this period, when we don't take haircuts, we don't listen to music and so on. Why? Because there's 24,000 Rabbi Akiva died during this tekufa. Why is Lag Baimer so exciting? Because they stopped dying. Well, here's the obvious question. They stopped dying because there was none left. That's not exactly a simcha. There's none left to live. So eventually they'll stop dying. So what type of simcha is that now that they stopped dying? So it's like this. What's the real chiddush of Reb Shimon? What's the real chiddush of Reb Shimon? There's a lot of mekubalim, Pnimis HaTorah, Kabbalah. What's the chiddush of the Zohar Kodesh? What's the chiddush? What makes Reb Shimon and his teachings in the Zohar so celebrated, as opposed to other svarim that we have? We have earlier Kabbalah svarim. We have there's a sefer called Pirkei Hechalos from Nachuni ben Akana, the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, a sefer Kabbalah. We have Sefer Yitzira that goes back to Avram Avinu. There's no shortage of Kabbalah svarim, but somehow the Zohar, that made it. What's the meaning of the Zohar? So it's like this. The real chiddush of Reb Shimon, the Iker chiddush of Reb Shimon, and it's hard to explain this really, but the Iker chiddush of Reb Shimon in the Zohar is that there's such a thing as the Malchus of Hashem Yisbarach, and we're part of Hashem's kingdom. But the chiddush of Reb Shimon is that Malchus of Hashem is focused on unfixing. You see, when we think of Hashem being the Melech, Hashem's Malchus, we think of it as like a perfect. Hashem is perfect. His Malchus should be perfect. Everything should be perfect. And so there is this picture, this image of a Malchus of Hashem, which is like a perfect Malchus. That's amazing. And in a certain sense, like on a big picture type of historical perspective, like the first Beis HaMikdash was what? That was mamash perfect. You had Nevuah, and you had Ruach HaKodesh, you had the Aron in the Beis HaMikdash. It was mamash perfect. It was the place of Malchus, that's the Beis HaMikdash. And the Malchus of Hashem that was established, that was revealed, the first Beis HaMikdash, was a Malchus of perfection, a Malchus of tzaddikim, Malchus of perfection, revealing, reflecting Hashem's perfection. The Chiddush of Reb Shimon, however, is that there's another equally important and equally holy Malchus, which is not a Malchus of perfection, but a Malchus of repairing, a Malchus of fixing. The Rabbanish, it's one thing, it's like, if a person had two options, right? Either like a new car, which like never had any issues, or a car that had a million issues, and was like, put back together. Each piece was like, renewed. You bring it, constantly to the to the mechanic to replace every part. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a new car. But no one's going to pick that one, right? Why? Because that's a Malchus. That's a car that's been repaired. Yeah, it's been repaired pretty well. But that's not royalty, right? No one would give that to a king. The Chiddush of Reb Shimon is that you're 100% wrong. The Malchus of Hashem Yisparach, the Rebbeinu Shloim Mamish, takes pride in being king over a perfect Malchus, like the first Beis HaMikdash, and he's as prideful in being a king over a Malchus that's being repaired constantly. And that was the second Beis HaMikdash. What was the second Beis HaMikdash? The second Beis HaMikdash was Klal Yisrael coming back from exile 70 years and picking up the pieces and making a hodgepodge, building a Beis HaMikdash back together. And by the way, it's interesting when you learn through the history of the second Beis HaMikdash in Tanakh, you see that there's different versions. Literally, like when Klal Yisrael first were allowed back into Eretz Yisrael to rebuild it, it was rebuilt in a very, in a cheap way. They didn't have a lot of money, and then eventually they were able to raise enough funds. They rebuilt it in a nicer way, and then Herod came and he rebuilt it in an even nicer way. The whole Malchus of the second Beis HaMikdash was a Malchus of repairing. It was a Malchus of broken pieces being put back together. And the Iker Chiddush of Reb Shimon in the Zohar Kadosh is that that's the holiest thing in the world. That just as Hashem Yisparach is proud to be the king over tzaddikim, being king over a world that's perfect, he is as prideful to being a king over a Malchus that is constituted from broken pieces. That's the Chiddush of Reb Shimon. And by the way, that's the Iker Nekuda of Shimon HaTzadik. You see, the word Shimon, for example, is a combination of two words. Sham, Avain. There is sin. There is sin. And if you fix it, then it's Mash Avain. Sin has been removed. But the name Shimon means that there's a problem. That's the name. Shimon means a Malchus that needs to be put back together after it was first broken. That's what the word Shimon means. What is tzaddik? That's about tshuva. What's tzaddik? Tzaddik means perfect. Tzaddik means a Malchus that was never broken. Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik means that the Malchus of Hashem Yisparach, Hashem has two Malchus, two kingdoms, and he's prideful of both. He's prideful of the Malchus of the first Beis HaMikdash, the perfect Malchus of Tzaddik, and he's also proud of a Malchus of the second Beis HaMikdash, a Malchus of things being put back together. And that's why Shimon HaTzadik was the Kohen Gadol for what? In the second Beis HaMikdash for 40 years. And while he was the Kohen Gadol in the second Beis HaMikdash, his Kahuna Gedolah expressed Hashem's relationship with us in that second version of Malchus. This is why we celebrate Lag BaOmer as a time that after the students of Rebbe Akiva stopped dying. So yeah, it's like they stopped dying because why is that a celebration? There's none left. The answer is no. Now you can celebrate because now there's an empty world to rebuild. The celebration of Lag BaOmer is a celebration of what type of schus we have in our ability to finally rebuild something. In other words, that's the simcha of Lag BaOmer, is that you need Reb Shimon to reveal to us that that's something to be proud of, the schus to rebuild. One of the deepest tires of Reb Shimon that it's all revolving on the Zohar Kadosh is that this world is built on chaos. It's built on Taiva. It's built on things that are broken, and our objective is to fix. And there's nothing to shy away from when it comes to fixing something. If you know that there's something broken, there's a tendency sometimes when a person sees a problem to stick their head in the sand and just to ignore it, right? Why? Really, for there could be two reasons. First of all, you don't believe that it can be fixed. So if you don't think it can be fixed, it's easier to avoid it, right? And second of all, even if it can be fixed, I don't want to admit to myself that things aren't perfect. But the Chiddush of Lag B'Omer, the Chiddush of Shmini is that those two things are not true. First of all, everything can be fixed. And you should be proud of the fact that you have the opportunity to fix something. The Malchus of the Rebbeinu Shem has two Malchus. That's why in one of the stories of Rabbi Nachman, the last story he said, the 7 beggars, he said it was one of the deepest stories, the deepest story. So the 7 beggars, and the basic story is that you have a chassan and kala, and it's a whole ma'isa, but basically they're visited by their chasana by 7 beggars, okay? And each one of these beggars gives them a bracha, okay? And the basic theme of the bracha is that each one of these beggars has some issue. One of them is blind, one of them is deaf, one of them is a hunchback, one of them is lame, all different issues. And each one of them bless the chassan and kala that you should be just like me. And so the chassan is like, well, we should be as blind as you. And the response is always like this: it looks like I'm blind, but the truth is, I have such big eyes that the world thinks of me as blind, but really I have the best vision in the world. And you think I'm deaf, but really I hear so much, but I'm seen as deaf. Like these types of things. The 7 beggars represent the Malchus of Hashem, right? The 7 tzaddikim, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Yosef, and David. That's the Merkava. That's the chariot of Hashem. Those tzaddikim, they make this world the Malchus of Hashem Yisparach. And that story is revealing to us that the Malchus of Hashem is in twofold. There's 2 levels to Hashem's Malchus. There's the perfect tzaddik. There's the one that's able to see and the one that's able to hear. But then there's a part of the Malchus which is the one that's deaf and the one that's blind, the one that's lame, the one that can't walk. And that's not and they complete each other. There's such a thing as the Malchus of perfection, and there's a Malchus of imperfection. And a person has to be prideful of being able to participate in either of these Malchus. You know? That's why Nadav and Avihu, for example, there's a lot to talk about over here, but Nadav and Avihu in this week's parsha, so with the building of the Mishkan, so we know the pasuk says that they brought a kataris that they weren't supposed to, and they're killed, and it becomes this whole tragic thing in the middle of the building of the Mishkan. And Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's part of the plan. Like, good, it's part of the Chanukas HaMishkan. It's the fact that there should be, tzaddikim killed. And the truth is, you see this, that in the Chanukas HaMishkan, when the Mishkan was being established, the inauguration, you would think that everything will go exactly as planned, like everything will be perfect, right? Hashem Yisparach tells Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, bring these karbanos, and my presence will come to the Mishkan. Okay. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu does. Moshe Rabbeinu tells Aaron and his sons, okay, bring these karbanos, and Hashem said, we'll show up. So what happens? They bring these karbanos, there's no fireworks, there's no, nothing happens. And so Rashi brings down from Chazal that Aaron turns to Moshe and says, see, I told you, you're embarrassing me for nothing. I told you I'm not worthy of this position. I was involved with the Egel, and now, see, it didn't work. And Moshe Rabbeinu turns to Aaron and says, I don't know what to tell you, like Hashem said, it'll work. So they go into the Mishkan and start davening, and then Klal Yisrael feel embarrassed, see, it didn't work. And then after all this embarrassment and all this like you turn the keys and it's like, it's not going. After a few minutes, Moshe Rabbeinu davening and so on, then the Shechina comes. And in the Mishkan, like Nadav and Avihu are killed. And the karbanos that they brought on the first day of the Mishkan, like some of them were messed up because the Kahanim were not available, so they weren't able to eat the carbon for Rosh Chodesh. Like, you would think, like the first day, make it perfect. No, that's the point. That's the point. The Mishkan is the establishment of Malchus Hashem in this world, and the Malchus of Hashem is twofold. There's two partner Malchus. There's the Malchus of perfection, and there's the Malchus of imperfection. There's the Malchus of a world that's perfect, and there's a Malchus of a world that is being repaired. And those two things equal each other. Rebbeinu Shem was proud of both, Tzaddik and Baal Tshuva, Shimon HaTzaddik. That's what he's proud of. That's why it was specifically. It's interesting. So what was Nadav and Avihu's sin? It's Yosef and Yehuda. It's the same story. Nadav and Avihu's sin was that they wanted perfect. That's why they didn't want to get married. They didn't want to get involved with things that are imperfect. Ba'avayin chalal te'imi. A person gets married, there's always going to be imperfections. You think you're perfect, then you get married, and your wife tells you you're not perfect, and she shows you you're not perfect. Ezer kenegdai. That's Metzias. And you have kids, and it's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. Nadav and Avihu want to stay away from that, That's why even in the Mishkan there's two altars, right? There's Mizbech Hazav, the golden altar inside, and the Mizbeach HaNechayesha is the copper altar on the outside. So it's a funny thing if you think about it, because everything in the Mishkan, there's one menorah, there's one aron, there's one shulchan, there's one kir, two altars. Like, we know the one on the outside is for bringing karbanis, animal karbanis, predominantly for people that have made a mistake and are trying to bring a kapara. And then you have the kataris, the Mizbeach Hazav, the golden Mizbeach on the inside, almost exclusively for kataris, which is not for sin, that's just l'reich nichayach LaHashem. So, and what's amazing is the Nadav and Avihu take kataris and they burn on the outside Mizbeach. Because what's Nadav and Avihu doing? These two altars represent these two malchus, these two kingdoms. So you offer a present to a king. There's the present of Ketairis that we offer to the king on the inside, and that's the Malchus of perfection. And then there's the animal karbanis that you offer Hashem on the outside, which is the Malchus of imperfection. Nadav and Avihu's mistake was that they wanted to bring Ketairis even on the outside, that there should only be perfection. And because and that cannot be. That's not the way the Rebbeinu Shalom wants it. That's why, by the way, it's a deep opinion. This is why the sin of Nadav and Avihu specifically caused damage to the carbon of Rosh Chodesh, the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, right? Because we know the pasuk says they brought many karbanas that day, including a sacrifice for Rosh Chodesh. It was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and all the other karbanas, because they were special, they were able to be eaten, even though the kahanim were in avelos. But the sar of Rosh Chodesh, that was damaged, and they weren't able to eat it. So, why was Nadav and Avihu's sin specifically damaging that carbon? Well, the answer is, why is there a sacrifice? Why is there a chatas brought on Rosh Chodesh? So Chazal say that chatas, that sin offering, is not for anything that we did wrong. That sin offering, Hashem says, I want to bring a carbon chatas because I diminished the stature of the moon. Right? Remember back in the whole story, right? The sun and the moon, first they were equal, and the moon says, how is it possible to have two kings with one crown? So Hashem says, okay, you're right, you go down. You become lowered. And Hashem says, ever since that moment of lowering the moon, I regret it. And every Rosh Chodesh, when you bring a sar lachatas, you bring a goat, goat offering, a sin offering, it's Hashem repairing that lowered stature of the moon. Let's understand, what's the difference between the sun and the moon? Two kings with one crown. There's the kingdom of the sun and the kingdom of the moon. The kingdom of the sun means the kingdom of perfection, the tzaddik. The kingdom of the moon means the kingdom of imperfection. The problem was, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, l'chiu ma'atei satzmech, moon, become lowered. The lowering of the moon means that from that point on, no one wants a broken car. Everyone wants new and 100%. No one wants a used one, even if everything's been repaired. Everyone wants tzaddik, no one wants bal tshuva. Even though you can read all the Gemaras and the Gemara says, Balkam Shval Tshuva Imdim, L'maisa, no one wants it. The chen is by the tzaddik, not by the bal tshuva. That's the result of the moon being diminished. Every Rosh Chodesh that the sar chat is being offered, Hashem is repairing that. He's trying to repair that. He's trying to bring more chen to the world of tshuva, not just to the world of tzaddik, uniting those two kingdoms once again. Nadav and Avihu, the sin of Nadav and Avihu is what? The sin of Nadav and Avihu is rejecting the kingdom of the moon. They only want the kingdom of the sun. They only want ketairos on both mizbeachs. Therefore, dafka, their sin is poigim, it damages the sar of Rosh Chodesh. That's what's going on over here. So the avodah, and that's why Lag Baimer is in the month of Iyar. The month of Iyar is Rosh Hashanah, we know, is Ani Hashem Reifecha. Ani Hashem Reifecha. What's that pasuk, Ani Hashem Reifecha? So that's why it's brought down that the month of Iyar is the month of, it's a school for refuahs. It's funny, because the pasuk says, where that's coming from, is that after Kriyas Yamsuf, after, a few days later, after the whole thing is over, Hashem says to, Moshe Rabbeinu tells Klal Yisrael, Hashem says to Klal Yisrael, that if you listen to my Torah and you follow my ways, then all the sicknesses that I brought in Mitzrayim, I won't bring on you, because I am Hashem that heals you. So Mepharshim ask, if He's not bringing sicknesses on us, then He's not healing us. What does it mean? You're not sick. The answer is, contained in that pasuk is two things. There's the Malchus of Hashem, which is perfect. There's not getting sick. And then there's getting sick and getting better. And that's also something amazing. That's called the Malchus of repairing. Ani Hashem Reifecha is the Malchus of Hashem, to be proud of being part of the Malchus of Hashem, which is about fixing something. And that's Davka, the month that Lag Baimer is in. Chai Iyar is Lag Baimer. To be alive means that something went wrong and you're alive. Something went wrong and now you're better. And Hashem Reifecha. That's so halach l'maisa. The avodah of all of this is that as we're going through Sfir Seimer, and read the parsha, we're not getting haircuts and all this stuff, to appreciate what it is we're celebrating, because it feels like we're not celebrating, but we really are celebrating. What we're celebrating is the opportunity to refill the world with Torah. The world was destroyed after after 24,000 students were killed, and that's a reason to celebrate because now we can fill that void. You may fill a void, or rather than not be a void to begin with. No. That's the mistake of Nadav Navil. It's good. You should be proud of the fact that you have the opportunity to fix something. Fixing something is godly. That's repairing the moon. That's bringing the Malchus back between the sun and the moon. Hashem Shadal, we should be zachet to taka. See that day where as much chen we find by tzaddikim, by things that are perfect, we'll find that much chen by the world of Bali Tshuva. We should be zachet to see those two worlds unite with Shmini Tzaddik, the B'Yeskal Tzaddik, Meher V'Meinu, Amen.